Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next session of webinars of the Data Science Institute. My name is Jan Willem Middelburg, and I will be your host today, in which we're going to talk about a topic that is on everyone's mind. And today we're going to be covering how do you build a strong foundation in artificial intelligence for further career growth. And for the scope of this session, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the necessity to learn more about AI and hopefully also show you some of the compelling reasons why, in my opinion, it's very, very critical and crucial that everyone knows a little bit more than just how to use it on a day-to-day basis. Before we get started, let me very briefly explain a few of the logistics of our Data Science Institute webinar sessions. Firstly, note that the entire session is being recorded. Photos will be taken of this session, so if you choose to participate actively, note that the full recording will be posted online after the session. Secondly, we strongly encourage you to ask questions. That's the whole benefit of joining these kinds of sessions live. And in order to facilitate the questions during these sessions, there is a dedicated Q&A box on the left-hand side of your screen. So please use this in case you would like to see some of the questions answered towards the end of the session. Note that we will be distributing the full PowerPoint slides of the session today, so there's no need to make photographs or screenshots during my presentation. Everyone who's registered for this session will get an automated email with a copy of the slide deck. If you're watching this recording after the live session, you can always send us an email with the request for the slides, which we will be happy to provide afterwards. So now that we have some of the logistics out of the way, let's get started and dive a little bit deeper into this. And let me explain firstly a little bit of my background. So my name is Jan Willem Middelburg. I'm in the day-to-day life, the director at Sapiens, and in today's capacity, presenting as the president of the Data Science Institute. I do a lot of lectures, I do a lot of conference talks, and if I'm not lecturing or providing these kinds of sessions, I do a little bit of writing. So over the last few years, I've published quite a number of publications, which are always in the domain of data analytics and new ways in which technology is transforming the everyday lives that we are encountering. So that's a little bit about me. This webinar is being provided to you by the Data Science Institute, which is an independent body of knowledge for the development and advancement of data best practices. DASCIN does a lot of research. It collaborates with academic partners. It does research into new and advanced topics. And as part of it, it establishes an independent learning and certification path for everyone who wants to upskill themselves within data science, and related technologies. That's all I'm going to say about this organization. So if you would like to get a little bit more information, you can always visit the website at dascin.org, where you've probably also registered for today's session. Now, let's dive right into all the interesting components that we're going to talk about today. Needless to say, I can probably spend 2 or 3 days just talking about AI and AI technologies. But for today's session, I have created a bit of a snapshot of some of the very fundamental topics that I think are of interest to everyone. So it's a little bit of an awareness kind of session. Note that some of the slides and some of the concepts that I've been covering in this course are based on the AI Fundamentals Handbook, which is the picture that you see here on the right-hand side, which is also the publication that is being used for the credentials and certifications, which I will cover at the end of today's session. So in case you want to learn more or you found this talk interesting, note that a lot of the information that you will see today is explained in further depth and detail in the book that you see here on the screen. Now, without further ado, let me introduce some of the key topics that we're going to talk about today. And the title of today's session is really, how do you create capabilities within AI? And I wanted to avoid a situation where we have a generic talk about what AI is, because we're in 2025 today. I'm quite sure that everyone who's listening in today is using AI in one shape or another. So I thought it would be interesting to cover a little bit more beyond the basics and explain to you in more detail around the necessity of understanding this and why that's so incredibly important. And I will show you in a number of steps why this is so incredibly important. And the way that I structured today's session is I'm going to start with a bit of the story of artificial intelligence and get you to understand why there's more to it than just using a large language model or just using some kind of generator to create nice videos or pictures or whatever kind of aspect you're using AI for. And the reason I'm going to cover this is to dive a little bit deeper into fact versus fiction. So we all are probably familiar with the fact that AI can come up with strange results. We're familiar with the fact that it's not always accurate. But I'm also going to show you that the differentiation between fact and fiction is very, very critical to understand how you can use this in a business or enterprise context. Because in order to use AI effectively and in a responsible manner, we really want to make sure that we use models that we can actually trust. So that we can differentiate between facts and fictions. So that's what we'll dive into in more detail as part of this session. And last part of the session today, I'm going to cover how you can build a strong foundation yourself. What are some of the key aspects? What are some of the key learnings and technologies that I think you should dive deeper into in order to upskill yourself within this particular element? So that's a bit of the agenda that I prepared for today. As usual in these webinar series, I see some people have been joining previously. I always like to keep these sessions interactive. So if you have any questions in between, or you would like me to cover a specific or related topic, by all means, feel free to put your questions or comments into the designated boxes, and we'll cover those along the way. Good. Let me get started with a bit of a call to action, a quick introduction of why AI knowledge is important. And I was browsing through my collection of presentations from the last few years. And in many of the older presentations that I gave, I found a slide which is only around 2-3 years ago, in which I started a presentation with the question, who is using AI? And since the start of this year, I actually changed my deck because I think a more relevant question to ask these days is, who is not using AIs? Research shows that a significant majority of people in working jobs, and with that I mean information workers, are using AI on a day-to-day basis. In our office and in our teams, people are using AI models every single hour. So what has shifted into the last couple of years is that the adoption of AI has been accelerating to an extent where for many people these days say that it's an integral part of their day-to-day job. And I always like to explain this this rate of adoption and the immense popularity by showcasing the graph that you see here on the right, which is always, I think, a very interesting visualization that showcases how quickly the adoption of AI went. And again, this is just all very recent history. And this graph shows you the number of days it took to reach 1 million users upon product launch. And all the way on the left, you see obviously ChatGPT, which just took a few days to reach more than 1 million registered accounts all over the planet. And the reason that I'm showing you this is to make you familiar that this technology, which I'm quite sure you're using already on a day-to-day basis, is really not just transforming the way that we work, but has a much more profound impact in the way that organizations operate. And for that reason, I think it's important to dive a little bit deeper into this. And ChatGPT was obviously one of the most consequential technologies, and that's also what you saw on this slide in terms of adoption. But what a lot of people that are using this tool on a day-to-day basis don't really realize is what the GPT stands for. Now, today, obviously, we have a live online session, but if I'm doing this in a conference, I generally ask the question, what does GPT actually stand for? And just as recent as a few weeks ago, if you ask this question, you realize that a lot of people are using a tool without actually understanding or knowing what they mean with it. So to kind of give this to you in a nutshell, GPT is obviously an acronym, and it stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And why this is relevant, I'm going to explain to you in a second. But first, let's dive a little bit deeper into the definition. I think that most of us are aware that large language models like ChatGPT or others are generative in nature. It means that they create things. They create new artificial data. And in some of the previous sessions, we've covered that is known as synthetic data. And that generates new text, images, videos, audios, you name it, based on previous input. So that's really what that word generative stands for. The second part is something that not a lot of people actually realize, and that is the pre-trained part. The fact that a model is pre-trained means that the authors of that model, in this case, OpenAI, or for other models, Google or Microsoft, have used a tremendously large database, and this is the link obviously towards big data, to train and create and fine-tune that specific model. And just to kind of make you familiar around that, this is where we need all of those GPUs and all of that processing capacity. And training this particular model on such tremendous large data sets takes a long period of time, days, if not weeks, depending on your processing capacity. And the other thing to realize is that this process is very time-consuming, as well as very, very expensive, because you want to make sure that this is done on a significantly large section of data. So the model that you're actually using when you are typing things into your large language model or into your prompt is actually conversing with a model that's already pre-trained. And all of the different versions that we've been seeing, whether it's GPT-3, GPT-4, GPT-O, whatever you want to call it, those are different versions of a pre-trained model. So you're not live doing this. The part in which you adjust the context is a different concept, which I will cover a little bit later. But every time you fire up a blank screen or a blank query, you are dealing with the pre-trained standardized model. And that's really what the P stands for in GPT. And then the last key part, and this is, I'm saving the most interesting part for last, is that even fewer people realize that you are using a transformer. And transformer means the specific neural network architecture that is underneath the hood, literally. And that is the technology that enables you to build a model like that. That's called a transformer architecture. I'm going to show you how that works in a second. But if you're using this tool on a day-to-day basis, I'm always think as a start, it's very useful that you understand what it means, because these three aspects have a very profound impact on the results and the way that we use large language models on a day-to-day basis. Now, let me dive one step deeper into this, because remember that my first question was who is using large language models, or who's actually not using it in the new question. But in many cases, if I follow up that question with a second one, asking people who knows how it works, then depending on the audience, and let's assume now that we're not in a room full of data scientists, but my next question is, who can explain to me how it works? And then in most cases, you see that the room goes dead silent, or maybe one or two people raising their hand, because the reality is that creating these generative pre-trained transformers is by no means an easy feat. And remember that I just mentioned that transformer architecture. If you really would like to understand how this works, then you would need to look at the transformer architecture, which I'm showcasing on the slide right now. I would probably need another hour to kind of go through all of the details that you will see here on the slide, but it's important to note that a transformer architecture is built up of a number of layers, in which on the left-hand side you see input, which is typically the prompts or the questions that you put in. And on the right hand side, you see that through a number of layers, it is going to ensure that there will be a number of predictive elements that ultimately leads towards the answer to your question. And whether that's a new piece of text, a video, a nice picture, that is based, or that is transforming literally your input query into an output result. Now, why am I showing you this today? I know that we're in an introductory session today, and I absolutely don't want to lose anybody from a technical point of view. But I would like to highlight that if you look at the top right corner, you see that the output of this transformer architecture is an output probability. And this is something I think that everyone that is using AI in one form or another should actually realize. The transformer architecture model is a probabilistic model. And that means that it will calculate the highest probability of a specific answer. And the outcome of that transformer architecture is indicating which answer and which particular element has the highest probability as an output. So why is this important? And why is it important to understand a little bit more in detail how this works? If you are using a large language model, then the reason that it shows you particular results is that it is predicting the probability of the next output. And to illustrate that with a very, very simple example, here you see one of the developer environments from GPT. It's actually already from a few years ago. And in the old days, you could go back towards training and testing and playing around with these large language models. And the reason at that time I took this screenshot is it shows exactly how it works underneath the hood. And a lot of people who are using these kinds of technologies on a day-to-day basis don't actually notice. And I think that this is an important element to realize. So remember that I just mentioned that the transformer is giving you a probability. And this is exactly how a large language model works. So based on the inputs that you are giving, the large language model will give specific probabilities. And it will actually showcase how it actually counts this. So if you see here choosing between John, Alex, Mary, Catherine, and Jack, I decided to first talk to, and then what is the words that the large language model is going to give. It will show you exactly all of the probabilities that it's most likely to give as a next word. And obviously, it does this at record space. It's very record speed. It's all very, very fast. And you don't see those probabilities when you're actually using it. So in this case, the highest probability here is John, 45%, followed by Jack and Mary, and then Catherine and Alex. So the large language model in this case will pick John because based on all the information that's been trained upon, John is the most frequently talked to person in this large language model. Now, this is really, really important for you to realize when you're using these kinds of AI models. Because by understanding this, you become familiar with the fact that all of the outputs and all of the results that you're seeing by using large language models are probabilities. And that brings up a very, very interesting question. And that question is obviously, well, what is then the accuracy of those predictions? So if we take the example on the previous slide, did we really want to talk to John, or was this the wrong kind of prediction? Now, a lot of research has been done in this field, and I thought for today would be interesting to kind of show you some of the more recent research around that. I know that the picture isn't very pretty or very well made, but I always like to use some of the more academically backed reviews instead of some of the nicer looking ones. But this picture kind of gives you some interesting comparison in terms of accuracy elements for specific types of queries that are fed into the large language model. And what you see on the left-hand side is the accuracy. Accuracy obviously means how many % of the time was the large language model actually doing what it was supposed to be doing. And without going into comparison of all the different kinds of models, the main thing that I would like you to see is that GPT-4o is varying somewhere between 75 towards 85%, but somewhere within that range. And that means that if you take the inverse of that, that is wrong in 15% of the times, or that it can be improved in 15% of the time. And this is important to realize because probabilities remain probabilities. A probability is the possibility that something is right or wrong, as we all know, but it is and remains a prediction based on these advanced probability models, in this case, the transformer architecture that I just mentioned. Now, why is this important to realize is that means that as an organization or as a person, you can do a lot of work to increase the probability or accuracy of the large language model. And remember that in GPT, the second form that I mentioned was P from pre-trained. But what you can do in a pre-trained model is that you can adjust it using contextual elements or context optimization to train it and adjust it specifically towards your specific needs, which is done what you see in the top left corner through RAG. And basically that means you can feed it specific information, and the large language model will contextualize towards the inputs that you have provided. Now note that that doesn't fundamentally change the pre-trained model, because that would, again, take way too much time, would be way too expensive to do it. So the best way to explain it is basically you're putting an add-on, literally, on top of your large language model or your standard LLM. But by doing this, you can make it more accurate. So if you're interested in learning more about how this works, I strongly recommend the document that you see on the screen right here. I've posted the link with some of the techniques with which you can move that accuracy up. Because remember that somewhere in the 70 or even in towards the 90% range, in many cases is insufficient to make large business predictions. So understanding that this is possible and understanding how a standard large language model differentiates from context optimization and to optimize that further are key elements to understand in the journey of embedding and using these LLMs in an enterprise context. Now, even though I've explained this now with a number of very, very simple slides, the next form of research is actually showcasing that the reality and the way that LLMs are being used on a day-to-day basis is used very differently. And this is research that was done by the Salesforce report. I see that the link dropped off the slide, Salesforce research, I should say. I'll post that underneath the video after it's been posted. But what you see right here, and this is the part that I would like you to really see, is that a lot of people, 70% of Gen Z are using it, but more importantly, 52% of them trust the technology in order to make them use decisions. And this is also what I'm seeing in live, day-to-day life in a lot of businesses. A lot of people assume that if ChatGPT says something or any other kind of large language model, then they assume that for fact and are using that into reports or business decisions or any kind of predictive elements. Now, obviously, there are elements that are fully correct, specifically when we talk about things like mathematics or more factual elements. But for analysis and interpretation areas, there is a realization that this is not always the case. So we're slowly but surely moving towards a world in where people see what they seeing is believing, meaning that if they see an output of a specific large language model, then they take that as a matter of fact and fully base their decisions upon that specific model. And for those of you who have a few previous webinars and have participated with the Data Science Institute, note that we are always advocating for having a bit more knowledge around that, because the fact that the technology works is one thing, but then actually basing factual decisions upon that is something completely different. And this is why it's so incredibly important that you understand the more details around that, and that you're able to differentiate fact from fiction. And that all starts with understanding how it actually works. And I hope that what I showed you today with a few very simple examples and the fact that you now realize that this is a predictive, probabilistic model, further helps to explain to you how you can use this in a day-to-day basis. So my main message for the session today is really that AI knowledge matters. It matters that you know something about this, and it matters that you are able to understand how your AI toolbox actually works, so that you can make informed decisions and not just blindly trust what the AI tool tells you to do. There's always this part of interpretation, and you can verify, trust, or adjust the outcomes of your LLM based on your own interpretation of how it arrives at that specific answer. So my key message for today is help to understand your AI toolbox and what are the technologies and the elements underneath this. And for that part, it's important to understand the basics. I always like to use this very simple analogy, but I think it's a great way of explaining it towards others in the organization is think about AI as a car. It is a tool that will bring you from point A to point B. From the outside, we always know how a car works. You hit the gas, press the brakes, use lights. So we have made together some kind of rules within which we play, and all the different cars need to drive together. We quickly realized that if you don't use the car properly, it can do a lot of damage. It can actually lead towards accidents or even worse. So very quickly onwards, we realized that in order to drive cars safely, we needed to have some form of regulation, and the people who drove the cars needed to comply to some kind of understanding of what the car actually does. So everyone today is accepting of the fact that you would need to have a driver's license in order to drive a car. And how do you get a driver's license? Well, you obviously need to do some theoretical lessons. You typically also need to take a driver's test to showcase that you are capable and understanding of using that car in a safe and sustainable environment. Now, why am I using this particular analogy? You could make the same argument or the same case for AI. AI is a tool. It will bring you from point A to point B, not in terms of distance, but in terms of creating the work that you will need to do. But in order to use that tool safely, you do need to understand a little bit how it works. So I would like to change the definition here a little bit and say you don't use an AI tool without having proper AI knowledge. Just as you don't drive a car without that knowledge, you do need to understand a little bit more than just the basics, and that you need to hit the gas and use the brakes before you can use this in a responsible manner. And in order to get that specific license, you need to go through some training. You need to have some fundamental knowledge of how these particular tools work so that you can base your actual decisions around this. And to illustrate this fact, I generated the picture on the right with a large language model, obviously, that showcase the equivalence. I call it the AI driver's license, to showcase that you have actually understood and know how to use that responsibly. And I think that this is always a fair analogy to explain the need to at least learn beyond actually using it, or what you need to do in specific situations. Just as with your driver's license, you will not encounter every situation, but you do need to know what to do in specific situations. And that's why I'm a strong advocate for something which is an AI equivalent of a driver's license. Now, how do you get started? With the Data Science Institute, we've been receiving this question a lot. And in order to address that, we have created two different credentials in collaboration with APMG, which are the AI awareness and the AI fundamentals modules. Now, you might immediately ask, why two different kinds of credentials? Well, each of those covers a different kind of target audience. As I showed you today, it starts with AI awareness. It starts with understanding the model behind AI tools. It starts with the technology that is powering that. With an AI awareness course, you start to understand what AI actually is and how it works. So, for instance, the fact that GPT-3 stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, as I just explained, that's typical awareness kind of information. You obviously don't need to be able to build a model or do that. So for most people who are using AI on a day-to-day basis and want to become more familiar about what it is and what it does, AI awareness is a good entry-level program that doesn't go too much into the technical aspects. For those people who, however, who are a little bit more in the data domain and that would like to, for instance, establish a large language model internally, or would like to have more in-depth understanding of the technologies behind it, the AI fundamentals level has been developed. Both are based on the textbook that you see on the left, but the second program is obviously a little bit more in-depth, also for that reason a little bit longer, and the exam behind this that we created together with APMG is also a little bit more difficult. So these are the two models that are available through the Data Science Institute right now. So I hope that that kind of shows you the why of why it's important to know this, but also a little bit of the how, on how you can get started and what are practical steps that you can take in order to do that. And most importantly, even if you don't take specifically these two credentials, I'm a very strong advocate for making sure that everyone understands something beyond the basics. And if there's one thing I would like you to take away from the session today, is start learning more than just the superficial aspects of AI. Start diving one level deeper to fully understand how a particular result is generated. Because if you enter towards that specific step, you can start making more informed decisions on a day-to-day basis. And with that, I would like to move to the Q&A session for today's session. I hope that you have achieved a lot of new, or at least some ideas based on this session. And let's see if there are some questions that we're going to go into right now. Good. I saw quite some questions coming in, so let me moderate them one by one. Let's get started with the first one. Any specific jobs that benefit the most from AI, and so that you would recommend to take the course? Well, I think it's actually fair to say these days that every job will benefit from AI in one way or another. Obviously, jobs in the technology domain, but I'm quite sure that most people in that domain are already using it. But it's more also applicable in jobs that you don't might not think about it immediately. Think about the administrative or the financial or the marketing domain. I think that everything that can be improved by the use of data would benefit from these kinds of sessions. So I hope that that answers your question. Then next one. Question is a good one. Is AI awareness a prerequisite for fundamentals? No, it's not. It's just different levels of depth and different levels of the technical concepts that are being covered. Note that since the start of this year, we have let go of the prerequisites part, because a lot of people found that difficult to first need to take another course if they would already have skills in that area. So for all of the DASCIN programs, there are no prerequisites. It's based on different kinds of target audiences, and that's really the way to look at it. Any emerging AI tools that you recommend? Well, the Data Science Institute is a vendor independent organization. So I'm not going to give you, there's full lists of tools that are available. I see on LinkedIn, a lot of people are posting lists these days of interesting tools. So browse a little bit around that, and I'm quite sure you will find some interesting parts. Just from a personal perspective, one of the tools that really blew my mind in the last few weeks is all the developments that have been made in video production. So AI generated videos. I've seen some experiments with people who made entire movies out of that, which are almost unrecognizable from professionally made Hollywood studio types of productions. Obviously, it's still kind of hobbyism at this time, but I think this year, 2025, 2026, we're going to see some really interesting use cases of AI generated video. But again, this is just on some kind of a personal interest. Good. Next questions. Will there be more technical courses for AI at a later stage? Probably. We've decided with APMG to start with the basis first. I would say AI awareness is not so technical. The fundamentals is already for people who have a little bit more, I would say, technical and IT knowledge. So at this stage, there's no plans yet to make anything beyond that. But who knows? If there's a lot of requests coming in for that, we might make something like AI architect. I'm just thinking out loud, but not at this place. And then let's see if there's any other questions. Yeah, I see one more. What is your prediction for jobs and AI for the nearby future? Will it replace all jobs? This is a question I get almost every time. No, it's not going to replace all jobs, but it is going to transform it. And it's going to transform it in a way that you should be very, very mindful. And even if you are not interested to learn all about the technology behind it, which I'm kind of advocating for today, but you would like to know more, at least figure out how it will impact your job, because every job is going to change in one way or another through this technology. Think about that, research that, again, very, very simple to do. But the jobs that are there will transform. There's no doubt about it. And I think the consensus around that is quite strong these days. Good. I think that covered all of the aspects and all of the questions for today. With that, as always, I want to thank you for spending the time with us today to learn a little bit more around AI. I hope that, as per usual in these kinds of sessions, you learned a few things, and at least we got you to start thinking about the way that these kinds of technologies transform everyday lives and everyday decisions. Thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today. Keep a look at our calendar for the other upcoming Data Science Institute webinar series. And until we meet again, thanks everyone.